When I think about visiting national parks, my mind is filled with adventure, lush green scenery, fresh air, and a sense of escape. That's the reason why I love visiting these parks. And with the amount of people who visit national parks every year, we assume that many of these parks are safe and family friendly. In 2023 alone, National Park Services announced that the 400 national parks around the United States reported a total of 325.5 million visits last year. This is an increase of 13 million visits than of that of 2022. If you ask me, that's a lot of people going in and out of these national parks. But as wholesome and safe as people assume these national parks to be, there seems to be a rarely discussed dark side to these places that most people don't seem to be aware of. More specifically, is the fact that the strange disappearances in national parks seems to be way more frequent than they should be. But believe it or not, every year hundreds of cases of strange disappearances happens, and only a handful of these people are ever seen again, or these cases are to be ever solved. Moreover, the disappearances that happens often seems totally illogical, bizarre, or even unexplainable, even to those who are highly equipped to solve mysteries. But before we get into that, I just want to say welcome back to another Late Night Strange. In tonight's episode, we are going to be talking about some of the most strangest cases of kids that go missing in these national parks. Without further ado, let's get started. It was July 2nd, 1938, and the Beilhartz family had decided to go camping deep within the Rocky Mountain National Park as a summer vacation. On the day in question, they were going to Estes Park to do some fishing, and were hiking along a trail close to a creek by the name of Roaring River at approximately 8 a.m. Their son, Alfred Edwin Beilhartz, was roughly 4 years old at that time and was walking along the back of the line formed by his family. Alfred's parents, looking behind them, keeping an eye on all their 10 children, realized that Alfred was much slower than the others and was always falling behind. But as this continued, the more they looked back, it seemed like Alfred was falling more and more behind. As they continued their hike without thinking too much of it, they realized that shortly after, when they looked back, Alfred was no longer in sight or on the trail. As the parents walked back down the trail to go get Alfred, thinking that he was just around the corner, they would soon realize Alfred was nowhere to be found. His parents briefly performed a preliminary search to try to find their missing son, and when they had no luck, they decided to call in the park services for assistance. The rangers were operating under an assumption that Alfred must have fallen into a nearby creek or drowned, and so they proceeded to the dam of the river. This dam consisted of a fence line adorned with barbed wires. There was no way that a body could ever be carried downstream and not be instantly found by the team of rangers. But when this returned with no results, they dragged the bottom of the river for good measures, but found nothing to indicate where Alfred had gone. And after 5 days, they gave up searching the river. Shortly after, his parents even told the rangers that they thought that Alfred must have been abducted. They knew that their son wouldn't just leave his family, and they were unconvinced that he had fallen into the river. At this point, the rangers called in some bloodhounds from the nearby Colorado State Penitentiary. And for those of you who's been following the missing 411 cases, according to David Paulides, one of the most unusual suspects when it comes to discussing cases such as this, claimed that the bloodhounds were able to follow the boy's scent up a 500-foot hill from where his parents had been when he vanished. This is extremely bizarre because seeing as he disappeared when he was behind them, or behind the parents opposed to in front of them, as the scent trail suggested. The thing that was also bizarre was the dogs traced the scent to seem to be confused by what they were smelling. And they quickly lost the scent. Once dogs traced the scent uphill, the two pups began to cock their heads around and looked nervous. Eventually, both bloodhounds ended up laying down on the ground, unable to go anywhere further up the trail or any trail. Apparently, more bloodhounds were called in and had the same thing happen to them. They would sniff the trail only to lay down defeat when they reached a fork in the road. The search was eventually called off after a total of 10 days spent looking for Alfred. But the story did not end there. On July 3rd, William J. Ells and his wife were also hiking in the Rocky Mountain National Park. They had made it quite far up the Old Fall River Road when they got tired and decided to stop for a rest. While resting, they decided to look up to the beautiful slopes of the Mount Chaplin, only to see a young boy sat up on a rock in a section of the mountain known as the Devil's Nest. The spot was 6 miles west of where Alfred Beilhartz had initially vanished from, and Mr. Ells expressed his disbelief that any child could have gotten up to that spot without assistance. The child, presumed to be Alfred at this point, apparently made a shrill noise, walked out to look over the ledge, and then left the scene. The couple, not thinking too much of this, retreated to their car park, where they heard the news about a missing boy. Upon returning home, they couldn't get this off their mind, so they checked the newspaper and have seen that the photograph had matched the child that they have seen in the Devil's Nest. They promptly drove back to the park and talked to the rangers, but the rangers stated that it would have been totally impossible for Alfred to have made his way up that slope by himself, and that the rangers themselves couldn't even imagine themselves doing it in under 2 days without the proper equipments. They will eventually then send 150 men to search that area or the Devil's Nest, but came back empty-handed. There's been many speculations to Alfred's disappearance, but till this day, Alfred is never to be seen ever again. In the year 1992, Kenny Miller was 12 years old, but he had the mental capacity of a 4-year-old. As a result, his parents knew that they had to be more careful and watch over him while they went to the Yosemite National Park. And as his parents left him to throw pebbles at a pond while they prepared dinner, while taking occasional second glance over to make sure that he was still there, as the parents decided to walk a short distance to go look at a cabin. As they returned, they realized that Kenny was no longer anywhere to be seen. As a search ensued and over 250 people were combing the area looking for Kenny, nothing of Kenny has been found. It was as if he just disappeared or vanished without a trace. It wasn't until a month later a group of hikers found Kenny's body 1,500 feet above the area where he was last seen. This case baffled authorities, as the area where he was found was notoriously inaccessible, rocky, and filled with painful bushes. Until this day, nobody knew how Kenny got up there, and since he had the mental capacity of a 4-year-old, this would have been impossible. As Kenny's body was discovered, California Highway Patrol helicopter crew tried to retrieve the body earlier that day, but the craft was unable to land because of high winds. I found these reports extremely strange because many of these missing people cases, when search and rescue teams are called out to look for these missing individuals, strange weathers that weren't reported would show up unexpectedly. There's been many cases of high winds, storms moving in, or monsoons happening shortly after search and rescue crews are on the ground combing the areas. It's been said that it's like something supernatural was trying to make these search and rescue teams not find any trace of these missing individuals, or have the rain wipe away any scent where the dogs or the coonhounds can't track. Nine-year-old David Gonzalez went camping with his family in San Bernardino National Forest. At one point, he asked his mother if he could get some cookie from the family car. After 40 minutes has passed, his mother realized that David had not come back, and that the cookies that he wanted to grab were still inside the car. 1 week later, his badly decomposed body was found only a mile away from where he went missing. What is strange is that this area was already combed by authorities for days prior to his discovery. So this means that the boy's body must have been dropped there by someone or something. The autopsy revealed that there was no trauma or any injuries. David Gonzalez was just dead, without any reason or clue as to why. This is strange, especially considering that the power of forensics and the skill of investigators. But what makes this case of David Gonzalez so strange is not his disappearance alone. It is the way the local authorities and investigators seem to handle the case. To simply put it, the police and investigators were kind of hush-hush about anything, and any questions that you asked of them were answered in very vague replies. Even when David Beilhartz asked the authorities for records about David, he was met with hostility. The officials claimed that David was dragged off by a mountain lion, despite no injuries that would suggest that to be his fate. In San Bernardino, a forensic examination of the 9-year-old boy's skeleton remains show no evidence that a mountain lion or any wild animal killed David. And that is coming from 3 California Department of Fish and Game experts. So if David was not killed by a mountain lion or other animal, 2 theories remains. 1, he got abducted and murdered, or young David became lost and died of exposure. But these 2 theories still makes me scratch my head, as the autopsy says that David's body had no injuries at all, and him dying of exposure in that area. Many of the search and rescue teams have combed that area so many times before his body was discovered. And this is also another thing you see in a lot of search and rescue stories, where they have combed the area multiple times only to discover that missing person in that area deceased, or in extremely rare cases finding them alive.
I love my shoes.
Till this day, people are still trying to push this as a mountain lion attack, but Fish and Wild Game experts have came out and said in most lion attacks that we've seen, there would have been punctures or crushing, and this is not the case here. Till this day, we still don't know what happened to David Gonzalez. Perhaps one of the most strangest disappearances in National Park happened in 1969 to a young boy named Dennis Martin. Dennis Martin was 6 years old at the time of his disappearance on June 14, 1969. Dennis was on his first overnight camping trip with his father, William, and his brother Douglas, and grandfather, Clyde. An annual trip with the boys to hike into the Great Smoky Mountains, camping along the way. There was no complications on the first day of the hike, starting from Cade Cove and hiking to Russell Field, where they spent the night, and on the second day, they walked to Spence Field, a spot that was a lot closer to the Appalachian Trail. On June 14, between 4 to 4:15 p.m., the family was preparing the campsite when another family friend joins the group. Their name was also Martin, and they had a child with them. At this time, the boys wanted to play a trick on the adults, so him and his brother Douglas and the friend played hide and seek in the woods. What the kids wanted to do was when the adults get closer, they would jump out and scare them. Although Douglas and the other friend went together into one area, it is reported that the boys did not want Dennis to ruin the surprise, as his red shirt might give them away. So they instructed him to hide alone. So Dennis went to another spot to hide. The whole time it was reported that Martin saw where Dennis had gone and was not worried, as Martin would occasionally turn his head to look, and for about 3 minutes he did not look back, and that was all it took for Dennis to disappear. As the parents made their way to the edge of the woods, Martin and the other boy jumped out, but Dennis did not. William, who was Dennis's dad, gave Dennis a few minutes to appear, but he did not. William started to call his son, and within 5 minutes of not seeing him resurface or appear, he then rushed to the last spot where he saw his son, looked behind the bush, and nothing. He then ran at least 2 miles throughout the woods and calling out his son's name, knowing that a 6-year-old could not make it much further of that alone, especially in this certain area, as this area was full of vegetation and deep ravines. Dennis was described as a quiet boy and would not usually call out, but he would always respond to his name, so when his father was yelling out his name with no response, this was very strange. Dennis was also about 6 months behind his mental age. He was last seen wearing a red t-shirt, green trousers, and Oxford shoes. The area the family was camping was at Spence Field, which included 2 shelters with the Appalachian Trail running east and west through Spence Field. There was also a road that led out to Spence Field. When everybody that was camping there did not find Dennis, Clyde, who was the grandfather, hiked to Cades Cove Ranger Station to report Dennis missing, and as he arrived there around 8:30 p.m., the Rangers were then notified about how Dennis had gone into the woods and went missing. They then sent 3 Rangers from Cades Cove to Spence Field to check that area. As the Rangers arrived in that area, they've also questioned the other campers that were there around the area, and they will say they haven't seen anybody either, especially a little boy. As the search continued throughout the day, however, that night a heavy rainstorm hit that area, which did not help search efforts, as the terrain became very muddy and any scent for the dogs could have been lost. However, the Rangers and family members continued the search throughout the night. The next day, the search intensified, with local rescue and hiking clubs participating in the search, along with the helicopter, and the FBI's were also involved. They were in their own military and special forces units, and the special forces had their own contained communication, not shared with anyone. And this made everyone suspicious to something more than a missing person case. Bloodhounds and the Red Cross were also used to assist, and at one point, there were up to 1,400 searching for Dennis. And just like many other missing cases out there, the bad weather and rain continued. By the 5th day, FBI agent Jim Ride checked into the Martins family to see if he had any enemies or if anyone would do any harm to him and his family, but still no trace or any leads. By day 6, psychics and even clairvoyants were called in to try and give the family hope or tips. Unfortunately, those 2 were negative. The search continued until day 16, when the search operation was stopped. Shortly after that, a meeting was held at the Martins, and the FBI district ranger and the sub-district ranger had questioned, where do we go from here, as there was no evidence of kidnapping. As this was clearly a missing case, they decided to continue investigating it, and the chief ranger said that they will allow 3 of his best men to continue the search with any volunteer who choose to do so. So the search continued, and the search for Dennis Miller would be known as the most extensive search in national park history. There were a lot of speculations on Dennis's disappearance, but one of the strangest reports came from a man named Harold Key. 5 weeks after, on July 21st, 1969, the FBI received a phone call from a man named Harold Key. He stated that he was at the park of the day that Dennis disappeared. He heard a scream late in the afternoon and saw a man moving in the bushes. His daughters reported that it was a bear. However, the man stated that it looked like a man carrying something over his shoulders, and he's also mentioned that he did not know the park well and was unsure on how close Spence Field was to them at the time. The FBI then requested that the man goes into the park with an agent to point out the area where he saw this man or bear. Nothing have came out of that, but there were also many speculations of Dennis being a victim of cannibalism feral humans that was living undetected in the national park and the Appalachian Mountains. But what we know is that those who believe this theory think that the FBI's are covering up these wild mans who live up in the mountains. And as the search continued, nothing would ever be found of Dennis Martin. Not even a body or a child skeleton was ever found. What was strange to me was they sent so much people of different backgrounds, like for example psychics and clairvoyants, with the FBI's, the Green Berets, and the police looking for Dennis Martin. You would think some kind of footprint or clothing would show up, but nothing has ever turned up for Dennis Martin. What is really bizarre about this case is that the government's reaction to it. The leader of the FBI group who organized the search committed suicide for unknown reasons. As the years has gone by, another special force member by the name of Harold Cleveland later issued a statement in 2014 in which he said something paranormal must have been afoot. In a statement that he sent to the News of the Weird, he wrote, "Our special forces are never called to assist in civilian operation that falls into the local National Guard and approved by the state governor. The fact that they were armed as well as another huge no-no. During my command and every other mission I was aware of, we were not allowed by federal protocol to do so. Something is very wrong with this missing case scenario. I've done some research on this case, both while on active duty and after my retirement. The inside fact that this case depicts a frightening investigation. Bottom line is that searching started within a few minutes of the boy's disappearance and lasted 3 months with every resource imaginable being deployed. Don't even start with the terrain was difficult, holes and caves and cliffs and creeks, etc. Our special troops can find almost anything, anytime and in any terrain. We have the highest technologies available worldwide and the easiest best training and the real world wartime and mission specific experience that the normal civilian can't even imagine. After studying this case, the fact that no trace of the boy was ever found is mind-boggling. The Green Berets that were tasked in the search were there for a specific reason. They were armed for a specific reason. I can't say and won't say why because my oath document won't allow it, but I will remind you of this fact. Nationwide, there has only been 4 occasions where the special forces were brought in on a civilian missing person case. 2 of these involve a possible armed perpetrator. The other 2 were this case and another similar to it about 3 years later and a regional nearby. This is out of thousands of missing cases since the early 60s when our special troops were born. This was the quote-unquote statement in 2014 that was reported by the special force member named Harold Cleveland. What I know is that we aren't being told exactly what lives in our national parks. In other words, there's something potentially terrifying living in these national parks related to all these strange missing cases. And I hear you, there are a lot of people going missing every day, and there are also serial killers that has never been caught. But there are these few cases out there that are extremely strange, and we civilians don't know what it is. By judging by all these missing 411 stories and these missing cases out there that's never been solved, we probably don't want to know what's out there that's living in our national parks. Can you just imagine the financial loss these national parks will have if the government came out and said that there are cryptids, Bigfoot, and portals in these national parks that were causing these people to go missing? And those who visit these parks will have to be careful because it's not just bears and cougars they'll have to worry about. It is also all the strange paranormal things they will have to look out for also. I personally think if the government was to ever come out and say this, people would go out looking for these things. But aside from all of that, back in Laos, my parents always tell us these stories of people who go missing. They would search, then later consult with the shaman, who would then go into the spiritual realm, or what we call it, other dimension, to go look for these missing individuals. They will find them and bring them back to the physical world where the person would then appear or be found shortly after. Believe it or not, it is exactly like the movie Insidious, where they astral project into the spiritual realm to go and find the individuals and bring them back to the red door. And the shamans in our culture were known to have this power where they can astral project into the spiritual realm to go find those lost individuals or lost souls. This all sounds crazy, but in our culture, there is an entity known to block individuals from the physical world, transitioning them into the spirit world, and then the only way to get them back out of the spiritual world is through spiritual guidance from a shaman. These reports of these blockers are known throughout Southeast Asia, where those who go missing fall prey to these shadow people. There are also many entities out there that will take people from the physical world into the spiritual world to be their bride or husband. And those who stay in the spiritual realm for too long will actually die in the physical world. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because there are so many strange missing cases out there that cannot be proven by science, or even with logic. I'm not saying that the shadow person is the root cause for these missing individuals, or blame it on any kind of cryptid or Bigfoot, but as you dive deep into some of these missing cases, man, they are extremely strange, and it reminds me a lot about the stories that my parents always tell us about these shadow entities. But growing up in the US, there's a lot of people out there who do not believe in the spiritual world at all. When I talk to people about it, a lot of people would dismiss the topic. But if you look at all the other countries out there, or other religions, a lot of people do acknowledge the spiritual realm along with spiritual entities. In this world, there is a physical world and there is a spiritual world, and there's just some things science cannot explain. So what I'm saying is be open-minded. And there might just be more to these folklores than you can imagine. But that is all I have for you guys today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode where I talk about these missing cases and share some of the folklores my parents told me about these shadow entities that block individuals. For those of you who are new here, please like and subscribe. Put a comment down below what you think. And I'll see you guys all again on the next episode of Late Night Strange. And like always, stay strange. Goodbye, guys.